It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC, live from the green space today. And when we're in the green space, you can watch the Brian Lehrer Show as well as listen as we stream live video. Just go to WNYC.org or thegreenspace.org or the WNYC Facebook page. We're going to do some impeachment headlines from the last day right now. And number one is the story that just broke this morning during the show that Richard read during the newscast, that two business associates of President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, were arrested and are in custody. And it's not every day that a news headline gets a round of applause from a live studio audience. So what's the deal here? Well, the two men, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, helped Giuliani investigate former Vice President Joe Biden. I'm reading from the Washington Post version of this breaking news, which says they were arrested last night in Virginia and charged with campaign finance violations, according to a person familiar with the charges. And here's the deal. According to the indictment, Parnas, Fruman, and other defendants, quote, conspired to circumvent the federal laws against foreign influence by engaging in a scheme to funnel foreign money to candidates for federal and state office so that the defendants could buy potential influence with the candidates' campaigns and the candidates' governments. So they're supposed to appear in court after that language, apparently from the indictment, and obviously that news will break as the day goes on. Impeachment-related headline number two. For the first time, Joe Biden is now calling for Trump's impeachment, not just an inquiry. And we have tape of Joe Biden that will come eventually. Other candidates, including Elizabeth Warren, were already on the record for impeachment. Now Biden is too, and he's also started using the Trump-Ukraine scandal as an argument for himself in the Democratic primaries. He says he's not going to let the Trump-Ukraine scandal decide who the Democratic nominee is. Headline number three, since we added that one at the top. As Democrats press the content of the president's behavior, Republicans are falling back on process to try and change the subject. Now, this is really important because it's not going to go away ever during the impeachment process. We will be hearing it's unfair in one way or another as a parallel track to the debate over the president's actual behavior. We'll hear it over and over again, no matter what the process is. And the worse the news gets for the president on substance, the louder the complaints about process will probably get, so get used to dealing with it. On center stage right now on the process track, the White House is refusing to cooperate at all with requests or even congressional subpoenas for documents and witnesses, arguing two things: that Speaker Pelosi hasn't taken a full House vote authorizing the impeachment inquiry, as was done in the Nixon and Clinton cases, and isn't offering the president due process in impeachment hearings, like allowing the Republicans to issue subpoenas like the majority Democrats can do. Now, to be clear, neither of those things is required under the law or the Constitution or the rules of the House. They're not required. But they're things the Republicans can try to change the subject with from the central issue of the president's behavior. One more thing on this, we'll call it headline 2A. The stonewalling based on process complaints is an attempt to run out the clock before the election. Do we have the Trump cut available? There's a Trump clip that we pulled for this on the stonewalling based on process complaints as an attempt to run out the clock before the election, and as he often does, Trump admitted it yesterday right out in the open.
We wrote a letter yesterday, and probably ends up being a big Supreme Court case. Maybe it goes a long time, I don't know.
Trump yesterday. All right. Headline number 4, the really dangerous Pence factor. Pence ducked a question yesterday about whether he knew if military aid to Ukraine was being tied to investigating the Bidens. The Washington Post has reported on how Pence was used to help keep the pressure on Ukraine, even if Pence didn't utter the connection himself. The Democrats want transcripts of Pence's conversations with President Zelensky by next Tuesday, and if Pence is ever found complicit enough to be removed from office, along with Trump, the Constitution puts the Speaker of the House as next in line. Enough Enough said about how dangerous the Pence factor is. Headline number 5, the polls are beginning to matter more than before. Here's the headline on the Fox News website this morning, quote, Fox News poll, record support for Trump impeachment. And the story says a new high of 51%, so they're over a majority now, wants Trump impeached and removed from office. In July, 42% favored impeachment and removal, so that's a jump. And those are numbers from Fox. And finally, headline number 6, and indulge me on this one because it's not actually new, but the point is this could be the headline every day. It's, let's keep our eye on the ball. The original whistleblower's claims have been largely corroborated by documentary evidence, right? The rough transcript released by the White House itself of the Trump-Zelensky phone call corroborates that Trump asked for Ukraine to investigate the Bidens, and that debunked conspiracy theory about Ukraine inspiring the Russia investigation on false premises right after President Zelensky asked Trump for military aid. And the White House also admits the whistleblower's other central claim, that the records from the phone call were put in an extra classified system where conversations like that don't usually go. That's an indication, at least, that they felt they had something to hide. So that's the main plot. Don't lose the forest for the trees. In my opinion, the whistleblower doesn't even matter anymore because the White House admits the behavior that the complaint brought to light. The central question may increasingly become, he did it, but is it bad enough for removal from office? But the president continues to accuse the whistleblower, who's a CIA agent, of treason. Same with the other government officials who gave the whistleblower the information about the president's questionable behavior. Trump calls them members of the deep state. Joining me now is New York Times columnist James B. Stewart, whose new book is called Deep State, Trump, the FBI, and the Rule of Law. Hi, James. Welcome back to WNYC.
Hi, Brian. Great to be here. Thank you.
Many things in your book are about how this president considers himself above the law. We'll get to lots of details from the book. But how much are you seeing this blanket new refusal to comply with any subpoenas in that light?
Well, this is absolutely consistent with behavior that is on ample display in the pages of Deep State. I mean, not only is he not complying, but he is weaponizing this whole concept of the deep state to brand, as you pointed out, virtually anyone who brings evidence to light that he doesn't happen to like as a so-called traitor. And by the way, he has implicitly reminded people that the penalty for treason is death. I mean, he has taken this to an extreme that no one has ever seen in American history before. And now, may I just point out that this is not a new tactic. It's extreme, but the idea that when you're accused of wrongdoing, that you then attack the attacker is a tried and true strategy. It was mildly used by comparison by Clinton with the Lewinsky case. It was blatantly used by O.J. Simpson in his murder trial. I need to point out, I think, that it typically is a strategy used by people who are either guilty or for whom there is a massive amount of evidence that they're trying to counteract. Hillary Clinton did not start talking about a deep state when she was being investigated for emails. She cooperated.
She did talk about a vast right-wing conspiracy when her husband was being investigated for sexual malfeasance.
Yes, but a vast right-wing conspiracy is vague and mild compared to accusing someone of being a traitor and naming names. And by the way, getting investigations launched. Did you notice just, I think it was yesterday, the Justice Department is now investigating Mueller for potential crimes, for potentially having lied on something.
Wait, what? I didn't hear that one. I was spending too much time atoning,
that was in the
I
news
guess.
yesterday. And, McCabe, there's a grand jury sitting on McCabe. Peter Strzok was fired, even though the FBI, said he shouldn't be. James Comey fired, and then he was investigated for possible criminal charges. The Justice Department, to its credit, said there was no basis for that. I will say the exciting thing, or at least heartening thing about the fact that these Giuliani aides were arrested is that it was handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, which shows that someone in the Justice Department is still willing to follow the law, to discharge their duties, and take the facts where they lead.
That Berman, the Trump appointee who succeeded Preet Bharara, who Trump fired, has his fingerprints on this?
Yes. And I think it shows a willingness to show the traditional independence of the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan and an independence of the Justice Department, which frankly has been vanishing by the day from Washington as we see Barr. It all, again, very predictable from the events in deep state. But he exonerated Trump before the FBI even did an investigation. The proper way to handle the whistleblower would have been to take that complaint, refer it to the FBI, have the FBI investigate, and then make a prosecutorial decision. Barr exonerated the president before the facts were even known.
Politically, Democrats seem to have a tough choice right now. They could go to court to get a ruling that the process is legit and the subpoenas can't be defied, but Pelosi wants this done one way or another in 2019. And you heard the clip of Trump reminding everyone that the legal process can take a long time. So how much is this similar to Mueller deciding whether to go to court to compel the president to testify?
Well, I think impeachment, we should all bear in mind, is a political process. It has elements of legal process involved. I think, people have said Trump is entitled to certain elements of due process, but it is not a courtroom proceeding. It is a political proceeding, and it means that very, very different standards
But Mueller,
apply.
I think, ultimately did not go to court and let the president off with just a limited number of written answers, partly so the process wouldn't continue to drag out forever and ever.
Right. Well, you see that in the pages of my book. I personally feel that was a mistake. I don't think any prosecutor would, well, I mean, he's the president, of course, but typically you do not let a defendant off the hook. I mean, you want to put them on record under oath answering questions, and Mueller did not require him to testify at all about obstruction issues, and he also did not require him to testify about anything that happened after he took office. Now, there were two things, I think. One, the delay. Secondly, he felt he already had enough evidence on these issues, although it enabled Trump to then come forward and say, oh, it was total victory. If I had been Mueller, honestly, I would have said either come and testify, and if you want to invoke constitutional privileges, and I'm going to go back to Congress and say I cannot discharge the mission on which I was charged to doing, and then let Trump reap the political consequences.
James B. Stewart, my guest on WNYC, New York Times columnist and author now of Deep State, Trump, the FBI, and the Rule of Law. Green Space audience, if you have a question, you can raise your hand. We'll come around with a microphone. Listeners on the radio, 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. Deep State. Your book does not mention Glenn Greenwald, the lefty journalist and Edward Snowden ally, who I've seen credited with coining the term deep state. And for context, until Trump, I think it's fair to say it was more the left than the right that saw the intelligence agencies as a deep state, sort of military-industrial intelligence complex, as in so many things that happened under Bush, like warrantless wiretapping and the massive cell phone and web surfing data collection that Snowden blew the whistle on. Is that the origin of the term as you understand it?
Well, I do trace the origin of that. It originated really in countries like Turkey and Egypt, where vested power interests, be they political bureaucracy, corporations, other powerful interests, would periodically pull together and overtly overthrow, in some cases an elected official, other cases dictators. Didn't really matter, but it was about preserving their own power.
So for the U.S. context?
When it leaped to the U.S., it was something very different. As you point out, it was very much taken up by the left, although there was an author and commentator named Mike Lofgren, who's actually a Republican, who promoted it, and that it took hold after that. But it was something akin to the old military-industrial complex. The heart of the deep state was Wall Street. It was Goldman Sachs. It was not the FBI and the Justice Department. As this has now evolved in the Trump administration, as I said, he's weaponized the notion of deep state and has turned it against the bureaucracies of the United States. And I think a very important point to understand, and something Comey told me explicitly in the book, in that context, the deep state is not something sinister. It's something that is protecting Americans from abuse of a power by elected officials. We have a system of checks and balances. A major check on the power of the White House are bureaucrats, are the FBI agents, Department of Justice lawyers, who take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States and who work for the American people. They do not work for the president. It is their patriotic duty to step forward when they see violations of law taking place.
Did you think this about those folks before Trump, though? Like Greenwald, though he hates Trump for many reasons that other progressives do too, also wrote as early as the first days of the Trump administration that allowing the CIA and intelligence community to undo his presidency, quote, is a prescription for destroying democracy in the name of saving it, unquote. So do you grapple in the book with deep state as, you know, an enemy of the people, shadow government as seen by the left, not just an enemy of the authoritarian Donald?
Well, let me say that I'm not approaching this story from the left or the right. I'm a journalist. I'm a reporter. I'm laying out what happened. I've interviewed very many people. I hope I've been able to convey what they were thinking when they took various steps in the process. But one thing that you see in the intelligence community, certainly in the FBI, there was no rush to try to overthrow Donald Trump. If anything, they were very restrained with the information that they got. I mean, the origins of all of this came from Australian intelligence. Australia, historically, one of the most reliable and closest partners of the United States. They named individuals in the Trump campaign as a subject of investigation, but they did not name Trump as a subject, as he was so eager to make clear to everyone. They were restrained. They were cautious. When Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, in one of the most remarkable scenes in the book, is sort of melting down and saying, let's invoke the 25th Amendment, get rid of him, let's wire, the FBI was saying, oh, wait a minute, this is way too far. We're not ready to do this. It was only when Trump himself fired Comey and then lied about it, and then they were afraid it was going to undo the entire investigation, that he was finally named as a subject. And by the way, with the assent of the group of 8 in Congress. All of them knew about it. They were all briefed on it. Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, is sitting there. No one objected.
You take a close look in the book at what I'll call the enigma that is Rod Rosenstein. The Deputy Attorney General oversaw the Mueller investigation. Rosenstein, just to refresh people's memories, gave Trump some excuses in writing for firing Comey, but then seemed to initiate and protect the Mueller investigation, offered to wear that wire to surveil Trump, but then seemed to collude with Attorney General Barr and spinning it as if it exonerated the president when the Mueller report did just the opposite. So who the hell does Rod Rosenstein turn out to be?
Well, in a nutshell, you just captured the transformation of, I think, a highly honorable, principled, independent person who came into the Trump administration. And frankly, this is what's happened to many people who come into that thinking they're going to serve their country, and they get sucked into this vortex where there is no ethics, there's no respect for the rule of law, there are no principles, and the ground shifts so radically under their feet, they are not prepared for dealing with this. So you see Rosenstein going into a panic, reacting with disbelief that Trump is treating him the way he is, who's asking him to lie, who's trying to make him pretend that he was the one who wanted Comey fired. He himself comes so close to being fired, he's hanging by a thread, but to save himself and to survive, he starts compromising. And we finally see him in this sort of pathetic scene where he's standing behind Barr, silently, blank-faced, while Barr blatantly mischaracterizes the Mueller report.
Why?
You know, the day he was named, someone asked Comey what he thought of Rosenstein. Remember, this is without bit of hindsight, and he said, he's a survivor. This is what it takes to survive in the Trump administration, moral compromise. Now, I will say, friends of his, Rosenstein wouldn't talk to me, but friends of his defended him saying, look, he had one mission, which was to protect Mueller, to get him over the finish line, and he achieved that, and he deserves credit for that. But at what cost? What compromises were made? I mean, Rosenstein could have fired Mueller. What did Mueller have to do to protect himself? Did he have to pull his punches on that report? Did he have to spare Rosenstein in the report? Because Mueller knew what happened, and none of it's in the Mueller report. It's in my book, but it's not in the Mueller report. And I think those are very serious questions, because in the end, I feel I have a lot of respect for Mueller and his long career of public service, but he did not fulfill the mission for which he was appointed, which was to determine whether a crime had been committed in the White House.
And you assert in the book that Jim Comey had some kind of leverage over Trump, and that Trump had some kind of leverage over Rod Rosenstein. Want to take those?
Yeah, well, first of all, you know, Comey has this meeting with Trump where he reveals the existence of this so-called Steele dossier, including the most salacious part, which has Trump in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Moscow. Now, whether that was true or not was not the issue, and Comey said, we don't know. We're not saying it is true. one of the revelations in my book is that the real reason Comey did that was so that Trump could not be blackmailed by the Russians. Once Trump knew, the FBI already knew about this, then there's no point in giving in. The secret is out. He's not protecting anything if the Russians try to use leverage on him. But Trump immediately realized, uh-oh, Comey's got something on me. And frankly, he was a marked man at that point. The very next day is the first evidence that Trump started talking about firing Comey. Turning to Rosenstein, there are many witnesses to his offering to wear a wire to get evidence against Trump and invoking the 25th Amendment. He then denied it, or he said, well, the wire was a joke, and he denied the 25th Amendment. He goes in to see Trump. Trump could have fired him. The Justice Department was drafting the press release that he was being fired, and he comes out with his job intact. But Trump now had this leverage on him because Trump knew Rosenstein was not telling the truth about what happened in that. He could have blown that whistle and gotten rid of him at any time. And what did he extract in return? That is still an unanswered question.
And how do you come down on Comey? Is he, as he appears to many people, a very earnest, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders, do the right thing in complicated, high-stakes situations, nonpartisan, and the criticisms start after that baseline? Where do you come down on Comey?
I agree with this characterization. I think, number one, he is very honest. I've never known him to make a false statement. Secondly, he's not political. He's truly nonpartisan. That's hard for a lot of people to understand. They simply don't believe that anyone could be, but I believe he is. Is he too much in love with his own virtue? That is a question that hovers over his performance. But I have to say, compared to the questions we're asking about other major behaviors here, I mean, how bad is it to be too virtuous? I mean, we don't have many people like that.
Comey to this day is against impeachment, even as much as he believes that Trump acts like a criminal and an autocrat. He wants to see the American people render that judgment since the election is so close. Do you think that's a widespread belief in the intelligence community, or they're just trying to get the information out in a hardball world and most of them aren't thinking about that?
Most of them do not think about it. I mean, as I said before, impeachment is an inherently political process. And most, not all, but most people in the FBI, the Justice Department, are deeply ingrained in a culture in which they are not behaving in a political way and they do not want to interfere in an election. Their mission is to uncover the facts and then let the political process go where it will. And I agree with that. On the other hand, I do feel we're in a very unusual situation now where the Justice Department has refused to investigate a major allegation against a sitting president. So I feel Congress, and the House specifically, has no choice but to conduct a fact-finding mission within the rubric of an impeachment process, because otherwise the American people will never know what actually happened there.
Are there, in a way, two intelligence communities, two deep states, if you want to use that term, a pro-Trump, Rudy Giuliani faction, right-wing one that was pressuring Comey to throw the book at Hillary Clinton in 2016. I've heard that story. And an anti-Trump one that sees him, earnestly as a dangerous authoritarian today?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, first of all, everyone in the FBI and every agency in Washington, they have political views. They may keep them to themselves or not, as the case may be, but they have political views. And by the way, they're entitled to have political views. They are specifically protected. It's their First Amendment right to believe whatever they want. It can be extreme or not. There was a hardcore cadre of anti-Hillary people in the FBI, and they were particularly based in the New York office. And I quote extensively some of the extremely harsh things they said. They wanted to bring Hillary down, believe me. By the same token, we've seen some of the texts from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. They never thought they'd be public, but they were, and they made some intemperate anti-Trump comments.
But I think an important part of your book is that you really go a long way toward exonerating Peter Strzok, right?
Well, both of them. I mean, I think and I looked into this very, very thoroughly, there is absolutely no evidence that their views had any impact on their professional activity. If anything, They were tougher on Hillary than many others in the FBI, and they were more lenient towards Trump. They were very, very cautious about making him the subject of an investigation.
We're going to run out of time shortly. Tell us one story of Strzok being a hawk on the Hillary Clinton investigation, as you document in the book.
Well, they wanted to subpoena some of her top aides and compel them to testify and to produce evidence where they got overruled, and they got voluntary compliance from people like Huma Abedin and a couple of other of her top aides. And I'm satisfied they got what they needed in that case, but they were taking a much more aggressive approach there. And similarly, Strzok was one of the main people who said, let's not go down this 25th Amendment route. Let's don't do the wire. They didn't make these decisions alone. They're not that high up in the FBI hierarchy, but they were participating. And it was only after the Comey firing and then the lying about it that Strzok agreed to go along with the idea of making Trump a subject.
Green Space audience, please thank James B. Stewart, whose new book is called Deep State, Trump, the FBI, and the Rule of Law. James, thanks so much.